This show is brought to you by Sparkade, our ADHD game-based learning platform that helps kids transform challenges into opportunities. Parents and educators, join the waitlist at play.sparkade.app/waitlist and be among the first to experience Sparkade when we launch. That is play.sparkade.app. You've landed at Spark Launch, the guide star for embracing what it means to be neurodiverse. I'm Mike Cornell, joined by CEO of Spark Launch, Chaya. Here, we navigate mental health triumphs and tribulations from all across the spectrum, charting a course through the shared experiences that unite us, and discovering how to embody the unique strengths within neurodivergent and neurotypical alike, igniting your spark and launching it into a better tomorrow. Hello there, I'm Mike.
I'm Chaya.
And allow me to introduce you to Lisa Modur, a psychotherapist in Austin, Texas, specializing in women's trauma and substance use disorder. Lisa is inspired to help individuals build authentic lives through spiritual and self-connection, and enjoys being in nature, planting her annual vegetable garden, spoiling her 2 dogs, trying to keep up with her 3 children, and cheering on her favorite team, the Longhorns. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here this morning.
Thank you, Lisa, so much. I want to share with the listeners that Lisa and I have known each other for over 2 decades, and we've both grown through our journey. And I had no idea that you have ADHD and I have ADHD. We had kind of lost touch in the middle, but then rediscovered when you found my videos, ADHD videos that I was making when I first launched Spark Launch. And I'm so glad we are connected again, Lisa. It's a joy to know you, and has always been. And thank you for coming on the show and sharing your journey with us.
Absolutely. I had no idea for all of these decades that we've known each other that there was any kind of ADHD component. I knew I had ADHD. I did not know that it was also something that was in your journey as well until I saw that video in this last year and immediately reached out to you. I was like, wow, finally someone is putting a name to things and kind of peeling back the lid over skill development and processes. It was just so lovely to see everything that you're doing.
Thank you so much. So why don't you share about your journey, your childhood, and how did ADHD look like when you were a child, and what was done? And then as you were growing up, how did you deal with it, and some of the experiences, negative and positive ones, that you've now discovered?
Sure. My ADHD journey, I remember being different with my parents from about age 5 on. I had difficulty sitting. I had difficulty learning how to read because I couldn't sit still long enough to actually sit down and comprehend what was trying to be taught. And back then, not trying to date myself here, back then, no one knew what ADHD was. They only knew that a child could not sit still, a child could not comprehend. And so they classified it more in the academic setting as a special needs child versus ADHD children that are very, very intelligent. They just process differently. And back then when I was a child, no one was doing the research to figure out how to reach an ADHD child. And so I remember from age 5 on, my parents discussing it with me, considering Easter seals for ADHD, trying to take different teacher recommendations. And finally, growing up in Miami, Florida, they found a school called McGlannon Language Arts Center. The entire school was ADHD. And it was a very small school. You were only allowed to stay there for a certain length of time in order to capture the skills that you needed to go back into public school or a private school setting beyond that. But it was very much a 1-to-5 teacher ratio with everything from behavioral skills to the basics, reading, writing, arithmetic, and how we conceptualize things versus just opening a book back then in the 70s and looking at things and just saying, learn what's on the page. We didn't learn that way. So it was a matter of my childhood of finding ways in which I could learn differently than others. And I remember as a child, it made me angry because I didn't learn the way anyone else did. As a adolescent, I had to do more verbal learning, more auditory, more visual learning, more experiential learning, rather than just my friends who could all sit down and read the chapter in the book and figure everything out and know everything. I couldn't sit for that. And back then we didn't have audio learning. And so my mother would read everything to me, and I would do all of my exams verbally and visually. So it was right on the cusp of when teachers started to make exceptions for students like me. They knew I was smart, but they didn't know how smart, and they didn't know how to tap into that based on what their own metrics were back then. And so it was a combination of medication, which was always the go-to back then, Ritalin and Cylert, and years and years and years of medication, because that's what you did. That's what you thought you were supposed to do. And then a lot of tutoring, a lot of experientials. And so that went on all the way through high school for me, getting those skill sets. But in my mind, I always thought it was just academics. I didn't equate to how it was carrying over in the rest of my life, simply because, as an adolescent and a teenager, your entire job is school. That's all you do. And so that's all it was until it wasn't. But that was my journey as, ages 5 to 18, really, with ADHD and ADD.
And I think even today, a lot of focus is on schooling, education, and fitting into that system. But it's not the other aspects, especially the emotional aspect, which is huge, massive with ADHD and not completely understood. So when negative things happen, people just want to stop that, right? So I think that's when people recognize about the need for solutions to that and take action towards stopping that. But instead of really understanding what's going on inside of that person. So tell us about that emotional aspect that you...
Well, as an adolescent, young college student, you're always compared to your peers on a metric that doesn't really reflect who you are. And so emotionally, you're trying to keep up with something that you can never keep up with. It's never going to be your norm authentically. And when I was in college, there was really little to no understanding of what could be done differently. And I remember specifically in college being very frustrated, studying for hours and hours and hours. And again, feeling kind of like I was a square peg in a round hole, because I knew what I wanted to do. I knew how to do it. I didn't know how to get there because I didn't have the support structure affiliated with an understanding of what this was, because nobody talked about it. Even though I now have dozens and dozens of friends and sorority sisters, and we were all going through the same thing at the same time, we didn't know how to speak about it with each other. And so emotionally, you're constantly thinking that you're behind, that you are less than, that you're not good enough to be able to keep up with what society tells you is the norm, even though what I now know is my superpower. So it's definitely different. I had phenomenal parents. My mother, she researched everything to try to help, to try to figure out different ways. She was always coming up with a solution or a skill. But by the same token, I was vastly different than the rest of my family, who academically excelled in everything they did in every aspect of their life. Things just seemed to come easier. And what I now know is it came easier because they were being judged differently. And emotionally, you carry that through with you as a young adult. You carry it through your entire life thinking, I've got to do things differently. I've got to do things better or work harder in order to make that square peg go to a round hole, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, you believe them blindly.
Yes. Oh, you believe them. Absolutely.
And you're convinced yourself.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, that you're defective in some way. Even though you might get the exact same grade someone else gets in school, you still believe that you didn't deserve that grade because you're different.
Yeah, and also because we might have had to work harder to get that same grade versus somebody else. So you always think that you were lesser than somebody else.
Yes. very much so. You carry that I'm less than with you your entire life based on how the foundation was set in early childhood on these things. Whereas now today, we have a much clearer understanding of ADHD and what parents can, should do versus what they never should have done back in the 70s and 80s. And because it never really leaves you that you learn differently or you process differently. Your brain is going 100 miles a minute and it's leaping ahead of lots of things. It doesn't stay in one place at one time. And so you've got to develop the skills to recenter your brain, to repurpose it to the activity specifically that you're that you're at task with. And until I was an adult, I didn't quite understand the relationship between the two, which was fascinating because I did very, very well in college. I did well in my work life, but it was always an uphill climb for sure.
And the confidence, what did it do to your confidence and how did it play out as an adult?
As an adult, you overcompensate. So confidence wise, you second guess every single thing. You replay situations over and over and over again. I would plan out things to a T just based on, I didn't want anything to go wrong in any situation. Very much OCD, very much a perfectionist because I felt that I wasn't up to standard. And growing up with ADHD, you always feel like you're not up to standard because, other people don't. And that entered the phase of, as a young mother, I never felt that I was up to standard. There was a huge comparison between myself and my way of thinking and doing things and other mothers that I knew. And so that still carries with you. You still have to do things differently. And that confidence, it's always in the back of your mind. You're always thinking it's not good enough. Nothing is good enough. Relationships, school, parenting, that's the theme that goes with you.
Yeah. We talk a lot about societal stigma, but there's self-stigmatization that runs very deep. What are some ways that self-stigma manifested in your life, especially going into adulthood?
Self-stigma, I would hold myself back from trying new things. I would hold myself back from relationships. I would always think in relationships that I was wrong, always, because of that self-stigma. I would never give myself credit for what I had actually accomplished and what I had actually done. And that is the societal stigma, and being surrounded with individuals who also carried on that societal stigma without even realizing it. So there was a lot that goes into the repeat as an adult, trying to keep up something that you've created in your own mind it's not real. A large part of it is taking on a societal expectation, and social media doesn't really help that because it's false. But yet, as you're raising young children, as you're socializing, as you're in marital relationships, everything has to be a certain way based on that societal pressure and that societal push. And, in your mind, having been raised this way, you can't quite conceptualize that you could do things differently.
Yeah. The focus is on others.
Absolutely on others.
Instead of bringing back the power.
Yeah. You lose your power. You definitely lose your confidence and you lose your power in thinking outside the box and thinking that there are other ways to accomplish tasks, other ways to approach relationships. You lose your power in developing different skills because your childhood is all focused on academics, but ADHD carries over into every area of your life.
Yeah. And that's something I don't think a lot of people fully get for some reason. Whenever they discuss ADHD specifically, it's always very academic focused and not so much life skill or even just day-to-day being yourself. It can have an effect, just how you interact with the world. I mean, I don't like the term condition, but it's a neurological condition in some way. It's a different way of thinking, and that affects every aspect. It affects how you sleep, your ability to feel when you're hungry, or other emotions and other senses. It's not just academic focused. And I think a lot of that gets lost when you focus so much on, well, we have to try to get them through school, which, great, that is very important, obviously, but it kind of leaves them out into the wind when it comes to literally every other aspect of their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was the expectation back in the 70s and 80s that an ADHD child would never go to college, that it was beyond their reach. And I was never led to believe that was the case, but I couldn't understand why everyone was surprised around me that I went to college, got into college, and did well because they weren't expecting it. And that's based on societal stigma and label. And stepping outside the box of that after college, going into the workforce and deciding which direction as an emerging adult I wanted to take my own career path into was also very surprising for those around me because I simply did it. And I did it based on confidence. And I did it based on lack of confidence too, because I didn't want to be defeated. I didn't want to feel that defeat. And I thought if I could always just achieve one more thing, that it would quiet those inner condemnation voices of you're not enough.
I would love for you to talk about your history with substance abuse and what
Sure.
your work today and why your passion to help women.
Sure. The one of the coping mechanisms that I didn't even realize was a coping mechanism with my own ADHD was substance abuse. And when I say substance abuse, it was a glass of wine to calm the brain, to recenter, and not something that occurred in college or in my early 20s. This is something that occurred and really began in my 40s. And it seemed to be a just immediate stress, immediate glass of wine, because that would rein in any sense of panic that I had over any situation. And so it was my go-to. And it seemed perfectly fine because all of my friends were having wine at lunch. Everybody I knew, it was the wine, the mom wine 230 culture at the time. And it just made sense socially until it didn't. And it became a crutch for me. Absolutely 100% did. And I just began using it more and more and more in stressful situations. There was significant trauma involved. And the more trauma occurred, the more that was my go-to until it got to a point where I kind of looked around and said, my life is almost in shambles as someone who is living to drink a glass of wine or a bottle of wine or 3 bottles of wine versus someone who's simply living. I was successful professionally, but yet I was using wine to cope with a lot of different symptoms, a lot of different, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'll need a glass of wine before I leave the house just to, calm my nerves a little bit and whatnot. And it just became such a large part of my life from one step to another. And at a certain point, I raised my hand and I said, I don't want to do this anymore. This is not who I am at all. And there were other external factors going into that to where I had loved ones saying, I think you need some help, and immediately went into treatment and I had a wonderful clinician who dug into ADHD, women's trauma, and substance abuse all at the same time. And I spent months and months in intensive treatment to understand the relationship between alcohol, ADHD, and my own personal thoughts on it and how I was using it to cope. And it was a solution to me. I found recovery. I don't want to say I found it easily, but it made sense. The more coping skills I had, the less I wanted to have a glass of wine or a cocktail. And it got to a point where I don't drink at all. I'm in full recovery. I'm in long-term recovery. It's not part of my life. What is part of my life now are wonderful, flourishing, thriving relationships. And I decided back while I was going through treatment for substance abuse, that I would help other women who were struggling with the same thing, that had gone through women's trauma and ADHD and SUD. And I decided I would become a therapist. I didn't know what that looked like for me at the time. I just knew that I wanted to help other people know that there's a different course that they can choose and that there are solutions out for them. And that women, we often don't talk about these things, especially as mothers, of what you're struggling with. But I felt that I could be a voice for that. And so I decided to go back to graduate school. And I'm a psychotherapist in Austin now. I finished my degree and I work with women. I sponsor women. I work with women struggling with ADHD as a coach. quite often and have a thriving life with a great skill set that I've learned over time. Relationships have been put back together, and I can honestly say I'm the happiest I've ever been. And that's really what it boils down to, is being authentic, getting to know yourself and getting to know what works for you, and not listening to people tell you that you're not worthy, you're defective because you can't do it this way. This is the right way versus the wrong way. We're all different.
Yeah. And if you look at some of the superpowers of ADHD, none of that is recognized in school.
No, not at all.
And in fact, you're punished for some of
Yes,
them.
very much so. Very much so. And you're always fearful of that punishment. Even as an adult, I know that when I disappointed individuals, if I felt I had disappointed someone, I would freeze. I could not function. And the anticipation that I might disappoint someone academically or in any varying degrees within a relationship would always impact my responses, for sure. And it shields the authentic self from truly being who you are and feeling like you're accepted in that.
You're never allowed to be
Never.
who you are.
No, never. You have
Because
to be
you were
what someone else
punished.
wants you to be. Yeah.
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 For our impulsivity, for our ability to talk the truth, our voices were shut off.
Oh, yeah. Very much so. Very much so. Voices were not wanting to be heard at all. And the rationale, your thought process, you may not respond right at the moment that something's happening because, with ADHD and ADD, we're thinking about it. We're thinking about how to respond and whether or not we're going to be shamed for the response, whether it's worthy of our voice, because we've always been told to be quiet. And so it comes out wonky until you understand who you are and how that's your superpower and how to redirect authentically what you want.
Intuition is one of our superpowers, which is never, ever recognized in school. And that intuitive nature can read the room and read people's emotions. And so we just don't want somebody else to be angry. And so we shut our voices and
we shut and we leave. I would physically remove myself from situations immediately if I feel that sense of panic based on someone else's emotional reaction. I will pick up and I will leave that room because I don't have enough time to process what's coming at me at that time. And that's within private relationships. It's definitely a challenge. And it was early on, but now it's not. So it's about that evolving evolution of getting into connection with your intuition, your self-confidence, who you are, and what you will accept and what you won't accept. Those are all the things that go into this, and that's through learning. And thankfully, Chaya has created this platform where we talk about these things now. And we're changing a generation and how a generation approaches their own children. So I do have a child with ADHD as well. So it's a different approach now. I can parent differently, even though I have wonderful parents. I can build on that and have different reactions to things.
How would you today deal with the situation as a more evolved human being versus back then? Back then, you talked about walking away from a room, not being able to speak your truth. So how does it look today?
Interestingly, I have scripts that I immediately, code words like, you know what, I need to step aside. I need to step out of this conversation. I need to step aside. I need to take a moment. And I never felt, not understanding ADHD, I never felt I was allowed to take a moment because nobody else did. Why would I? But that's part of the superpower because you want to react appropriately. You want to bring love, care, and compassion to the table personally. And so sometimes you have to step away and think about it first. And so having these scripts, having a toolbox of things that I can go to, even physical fidgets, things like that. I mean, there's all sorts of things that I do now that just simply work for me. They may not work for someone else, but they work for me. So it looks different in how I also parent. There's no stigma in my household whatsoever. Academics in my household are paramount. Of course, with 3 children, 2 in college, and one going to go to college in a year, I am immeasurably proud of my children and their accomplishments. And I want them to be proud of themselves. I want them to connect with every effort they've put in to be who they are and to be accepted and to be loved and not judged.
I think it's so powerful to be able to say that you remove yourself from situations that are not going to be helpful to you or not serve you particularly well, or you know is going to be create discontent within yourself. I think, especially in situations where we are picking up on the emotional state of others, and we will often do that for emotions that they themselves are not yet processing.
Correct.
And
Correct.
when you pick up on that and then start interacting with them, what ends up happening is very much you are almost processing the emotions for them, which is ultimately detrimental to us as people. And it's so important to recognize that and go, this is not a situation I need to be part of, not out of lack of empathy, not out of lack of care or anything of the like, but out of self-preservation and also knowing what you are ultimately capable of.
Certainly. And I think self-preservation is a good word. And that was something I had to be taught to do, or I had to give myself permission to do that because I didn't think I had. So self-preservation is huge. Growing up with ADHD in that realm, you're not taught that. You're taught anything but that. And self-preservation sometimes is a retreat. It's a retreat to peace. I mean, you can love others to the nth of time, but if it's not peaceful, you can step away.
Creating boundaries was something that I learned much later in life. And I think we are such huge, energetic bodies, and especially being intuition, our superpower, we naturally become empaths. And you start picking up on other people's energies and other people's emotions. So if we don't learn how to create boundaries for ourselves and have healthy relationships with the same people, we will always be struggling. So I wish schools taught that today, how to create healthy boundaries, how to maintain a relationship and not worry about things that the world focuses on today, power dynamics and things like that.
A lot of external factors.
Yeah, we just have one life, we want to make the most out of it and live joyfully.
Yeah, it's interesting, and having those boundaries set up, boundaries that preserve yourself and preserve your relationships. They're so important. One of the challenges I see today as a parent of emerging adults with all emerging adults right now is social media, and taking the concepts of what is social media normal in the Instagram and the TikTok and everything, and then trying to apply that to your own life. And I think women do ourselves a disservice by taking what one content creator displays as true life and then trying to say, oh, my life isn't good enough in comparison. I'm not doing enough because everybody else is doing this on social media. It's false. It's social media. And it's not what is actually real. And we don't live in white palaces and perfect homes. Executive dysfunction is a big factor in ADHD treatment. And it's something that anyone with ADHD, as soon as they understand it, they know how to deal with it. But it can plague you your entire life, executive dysfunction. And learning those skills, you're not going to learn them on social media. You're not. There's some really good content creators out there, but you're going to have to dig in and develop these things yourself with a supportive family.
Yeah, unless you learn the tools yourself, practice it, implement it. Yeah, maybe wrong a few times, but through doing it over and again, you're going to master it. And there's nothing wrong because we were not taught these things in school.
No, not at all.
This is not what they teach in school.
Yeah.
And
no,
yes,
don't.
And the other folks who are built differently, it's fine with them if they don't learn these skills because it's kind of inbuilt. But for us, it's critical that we learn how to create boundaries and have healthy relationships.
It is critical. It is critical, and how to set those boundaries with love and compassion. And we can all do that. I don't think there's enough conversation amongst women with how to do that and how to accept reactions as well when you set a boundary, because that was never something that was on our plate. And how to teach your children how to do that as well. That's, if we didn't learn it and we're learning it as an adult, and now we're passing it down to our kids who have different strengths, then yeah.
And you talked about social media, and I feel, when you see somebody displaying something, also learning to accept that, because maybe it is their truth and it's fine, and not learn to judge that.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
it's a lifelong journey. I'm telling you
Yeah.
this whole thing, but yeah, not to judge and say it's fine, it's their truth, and for whatever reason they have to be who they are, because everybody's calling is different, and everybody's purpose is different, life purpose is different, and just to observe and not judge and not make it ours, make their purpose ours, is a lifelong journey.
Yeah. And I learned that as a young mother, because I would look at social media constantly to see how everybody else was doing it, because I couldn't figure out if I was doing it right or not. And and it was just constant, scrolling, trying to figure it out, getting stressed out. The house wasn't perfect. The kids weren't perfect. I wasn't perfect. I had to be. And it's just that constant race, constant trying to keep up. And you crash and burn.
Talking a little bit more about substance use disorder, I want to go back a little bit about how you are particularly specifically helping women going through that. I was curious what your thoughts were on the gaps that exist specifically toward women who are going through treatment or recovery for that, and how they are often not supported.
Treatment industry is a funny beast, and it is. It is. There are amazing resources out there. There are very few really good women specific treatment centers that are honing in on this. There are thousands upon thousands of treatment centers in the United States, but it's not all black and white. Everyone is an individual. There are good formulas out there for recovery depending upon what you need, but there really aren't a lot of dedicated women specific programs that will address everything from ADHD to postpartum depression to menopausal hormonal symptoms, how that all plays into substance use, when substance use begins versus what the triggers are with it, really trying to dig into what a recovery support life looks like after treatment. That's huge for women. Women need women. When you leave treatment, you better be surrounded by other women who have already been where you are, who you can talk to. Right now, I sponsor women who are coming out of treatment, who are in the recovery community. That is an act of service, and being able to show them, this was my pathway, this is how I did it, and this is what worked for me. I would not have gotten through this without God. There's a spiritual component as well. For me, it makes sense, and it fits in with my own personal journey, is having a faith-based recovery.
Absolutely. That's the only way I was able to get on the other side, through spirituality and learning different components. And as you said, however it makes sense to that person. And that's all matters. And I see that as that spark that's inside of us, because that's where you have that purity.
It's a spiritual awakening. And when you have that spiritual awakening, whatever that is for you individually, that carries you through your recovery. But you have to have that spiritual component to be able to grow. That's really the bottom line. That's where it starts. And there's not enough conversation about how postpartum depression impacts substance abuse, how hormonal challenges impact substance abuse, family of origin issues, ADHD, all of those things. There needs to be more for women to reach. Sober living communities. We don't have enough women sober living communities. I think there's some really, really good ones. There's some great ones here in Austin that I know of that I would refer to, but that's not enough for everyone in the United States that needs it. When you look at the percentages and the numbers of individuals struggling with substance abuse and ADHD, and women specifically with all of those things, there are not a lot of big choices out there. So we need more. We need more voices.
Unfortunately, we have to hit rock bottom before you find that spark.
You have to hit rock bottom. You do. And rock bottom is messy, and it's different for every individual on what that looks like. It's a choice once you realize, this is my personal rock bottom. This is what it is for me. That may not be for you, for someone else. The average individual struggling with substance abuse goes to treatment 7 to 10 times before they understand this is rock bottom. And I hate that for them. Again, you've got to have a strict 12-step plan. You've got to have your recovery supports. Family support is imperative. That family connection is imperative to be able to come out of it on the other side of it. Because, the percentage of how many people actually recover is very low. And the relapse rate is very, very, very high, especially in the first 24 months. When, in terms of talking about neuroplasticity and brain healing, it takes on average 18 to 24 months to heal your brain and develop new neural pathways that reestablish your life in a different facet as someone in long-term recovery. And, for me, it's been 8 years and it's phenomenal and I wouldn't have it any other way. And so whatever I can do to help other women, that's what I do.
Do you see anything coming down in the future that can help address that withdrawal, that relapse culture that ends up happening and the circular nature of it? It's to be expected. And is there anything that's kind of coming to help with that?
There are a lot of different things that are coming down with it. There are some companies, one in particular they have an opiate withdrawal system that is fantastic. And that helps alleviate the opiate withdrawal in that individuals no longer have to use Suboxone, buprenorphine for life. There are other alternatives for that. But really, I go back to what's tried and true when it comes to relapse. You have to have a strong program. You have to have a sponsor. You have to have women around you. You have to have a sober living community. You have to learn how to live in recovery. It doesn't come naturally because you're retraining your brain to think differently about different scenarios in your life. And I had to retrain my brain to think about ADHD and those skills and women's trauma and different things that were going on in order to be in long-term recovery. And it's something I catch myself doing. Now it's second nature and it's a joy, but it's something I also do every single day. And so coming down the pike, newfangled ways, AA has been around for 80 plus years and it works. We always say it works if you work it. And if you have a specific program with a recovery coach, with a licensed therapist, and you've been through residential treatment, all the odds are in your favor. You just have to do it. And it's very personal, very individual. Generally, a relapse occurs long before the actual substance is taken in because it's a symptom. The substance is the symptom right now. Relapse occurs, you're thinking about it, you're planning it out, you haven't gone to meetings, you haven't done the things that you're normally supposed to do to stay in recovery. You haven't reached out to friends in recovery, mentors. There's a lot of work that goes into it at all times. It changes over time, but relapse is so heavy and high, you can't take it for granted. It's not something that I think about all the time, honestly, now, but I was terrified of it the first 18 to 24 months. And I wanted to do everything I could possibly do to not have that in my life. And so I did everything. If they said jump, I would say, how high do I have to jump? Because I never want to experience this ever again.
It takes a lot to change your reality, which sounds very frou-frou, honestly, but that's what neuroplasticity is. It's changing your reality. And
that's right.
It's not an overnight thing. It's gradual. It's rewiring. It's forging new paths.
You have to rewire it all.
Yes.
You have to rewire everything. And at the same time, you're dealing with a lot of really big emotions and repairing a lot of damage all at the same time. And so it's fruitful. It's a blessing, but it is very hard work. And I didn't go to graduate school until I had been in recovery for about 3.5 years. It was always a dream, but I had to make sure that dream was going to be a reality for me, especially with ADHD and how I could manage that. And I ended up graduating summa cum laude and just had a phenomenal experience. And I stayed an extra year to specialize in addiction studies specifically.
It's a bit like, I went through recovery, not for substance use, but eating disorder recovery and general mental health recovery, of course. But it's a bit like building a dam while the flood is happening. Like it's going to get built, but it's not exactly going to be that easy to build. And that's why it's helpful to have that information be available, especially for the neurodiverse community who are more susceptible to
They're much
addiction.
more susceptible to that. And culturally right now, what I'm hearing and seeing with a lot of colleges, there's a blackout drinking culture right now across all college campuses. And it's frustrating to see that. That was never in play when I was in college, ever. That was never something that any of us even talked about or thought about. But now it's the norm. And now you see it all the time. And as someone in long-term recovery, I sit back and I watch and I think, you know what? You're dealing with this at 21, 22, trying to get your life and your career started. And you're getting used to this stuff. And it's just not, it doesn't work. And that's why we see so many younger people going into residential treatment now and getting the help that they need. Thank goodness.
Going off of the fact that neurodiverse are more susceptible. And I think that with that culture, we are also very susceptible to peer pressure ultimately.
Yes.
And because especially when we haven't come to fully accept ourselves and accept what we're working with, there's always that yearning of wanting to be quote unquote normal or fitting in. And when we get into those situations, we can be surrounded by people who maybe are handling things, like that a lot better, and they're able to put it aside, maybe not. But what it does is it introduces coping mechanisms, like unhealthy, negative coping mechanisms. And that starts to then create those negative neural pathways. Like, oh, okay, I am both fitting in. So that is positive reinforcement. And it's also quieting my brain in some way. Yeah. So I'm getting relief.
Yeah.
I realize that, I think I've ever really talked about this on the podcast before, but I've talked about, though, that I'm straight edge. I never drank or done drugs or anything like that. It comes from being a punk fan. But I did almost drink early on because it was always around me. It was always just very normal, very casual. So just I didn't expect to not drink. And I remember I was about to privately, just a beer, nothing like huge or anything. At the time, I didn't know I was neurodivergent. I knew I struggled with mental illness. I had suicide attempts at that point, all of this, self-harm. And I remember I was about to open it. And all I could think was, I feel a crutch in my hand. And I think I know myself enough where I'm pretty sure if I start doing this, I'm going to latch onto it and I'm not going to be able to stop. And that is part of why I have chosen not to drink or do any sort of substances. And because I just know myself well enough. I mean, that is how the eating disorder, that was just part of that. It became a coping mechanism. It was unhealthy. It is
like a light switch that goes off.
Yes.
And you don't understand what turned that light switch on because you never intended for that light switch to turn on.
And you pretty much, it's like waking up in the middle of the ocean. You have no idea how you got there.
Yeah.
And you don't know how you're supposed to get back.
Yeah. I have the most amazing circle of women in my life, mentors, close friends who have all been down the exact same path. And we are all thriving. And thank goodness we have each other. Our children are thriving. That's the big thing, is our families are good. And so you can come out of it. 100% you can.
So Lisa, what would you tell a woman who's struggling, who has ADHD, and who's living the kind of life you did when you were struggling? What would you tell that woman?
Get into therapy. Don't listen to anyone who tells you not to get in therapy. Go to therapy. Talk about it. Find a women's therapist, someone with a specialization in hormonal related issues and some experience with ADHD, and just start talk therapy. Start talking it out. Start journaling. Start examining who you are. And sometimes you don't even know that until you see it on paper. One of the things that I have sponsees do, and I've done myself, is when I journal, I do it in front of a mirror, because you can talk all day long. But if you're journaling while you're looking at yourself, you tend to write exactly what's true. And because you can't lie to yourself. And so having the journals directly reflect the truth in that moment will help you as you re-examine them later on, because you're going to have to go back and look at these things in order to heal. So for any woman who needs help, ask for help, go to therapy, reach out to family and friends, let them know, I don't think I'm doing well. There's no shame in that. And I think getting past I don't know how to ask for help is a big thing.
It's so important, asking for help and knowing that it's okay to ask for help.
Exactly. But you have to be able to accept that some people may not want to help you, and you have to be prepared for those reactions.
Yeah. And not become discouraged. It's
You got to
very
keep going.
easy because there are people out there for you that
There are
will
people
help you.
out there for you. There are. You may not believe it at that time, but there are. There are individuals that moved mountains for me 8 years ago.
So thank you so much for those words and everything that you do. Where can everybody find you and check you out, your services and all that?
They can find me in Austin, Texas. I am not taking on any new sponsees right now. I have enough. So I'm overloaded with that, but they can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. If there is someone that needs help, needs to get into treatment, please by all means reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm well connected with really, really good treatment centers, especially ones here in the Austin, Texas area that I can heavily recommend, and sober living homes as well. Just salt of the earth, good programs. So if someone needs help, all they have to do is text me or DM me.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
Sure. It was great seeing you both.
It's always been a pleasure to know you. And I got to see the other side that we hadn't talked a lot about. We have, but
No, we hadn't. And it's amazing. This is something that this has been my journey my entire life. And it was your journey, but we never compared notes.
Yeah, because I think it's our own individual journeys.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So thank you again.
Anytime. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We will see you all next time. This episode was brought to you by Sparkade, our ADHD game-based learning platform designed to spark focus, confidence, and joy through play. Join the waitlist today at play.sparkade.app/waitlist. That's play.sparkade.app.